Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be discussing the mighty Yncarne. So, as you guys know, in the beginning of the edition, the Yncarne was kind of busted, being able to essentially teleport whenever and wherever a unit was destroyed, regardless if it was your turn or not. And this made the Yncarne an absolute nightmare to deal with as an opponent. Until, of course, the Yncarne got nerfed, not only in points, but also in its ability. And this led a lot of players to believe that it was simply too one-dimensional and too expensive to be worth it in most lists. However, I am here to tell you guys that the Yncarne is still, even in its nerf state, extremely powerful and a very good tool if you know how to use it correctly. And in this video today, I hope to share with you guys some of the secrets to the successful use of the Yncarne on the battlefield. So in today's video, we're going to be addressing the stats, weapons, and special rules of the Yncarne, basically doing a review of it. We're also going to be looking at its strengths and weaknesses, its combos and synergies. We're also going to be talking about positioning the Yncarne for success, which is, of course, the main thing you have to learn as an Eldar player when running the Yncarne. And lastly, we are going to go over how to use the Yncarne in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of it. So looking at the base stat line of the Yncarne is only movement 10, which might seem a little bit slow, but do remember that it does have the ability to teleport, and when you combine this with the movement 10, it's actually pretty fast. It's also durable to a degree. It has toughness 10, it has 12 wounds and a 2-up save, as well as a 4+ invulnerable, so it can take a punch, just not as well as the Avatar of Khaine. As far as its ranged weapons go, it does have a pretty powerful range attack with Ignores Cover and Torrent. D6 plus 3 attacks at strength 7 AP minus 1 to D3 damage is nothing to sneeze at. However, the D3 damage does make it a little bit swingy against 2 wound enemies. And of course, AP minus 1, whether it has Ignores Cover or not, means it doesn't have a bunch of AP. Anything with a 3+ save or better is going to be pretty durable against this type of attack, but of course the range attack is not the main reason why you take the Yncarne. The main reason why you take the Yncarne is because it has a powerful melee profile with either a strike or a sweep, and unlike a lot of monstrous creatures out there who have a strike and a sweep profile, both profiles on the Yncarne have an incredible AP value at -4, which will basically totally negate any kind of 3+ armor save and will reduce 2+ armor saves to a 6-up, which is pretty good. Typically, however, the strike is going to be better against anything with 2 wounds or more and toughness 4 or more. So, your standard Marines, you're better off just doing the strike. But if you're going against anything with 1 wound, like maybe some Sisters of Battle, you're probably almost always going to go with the sweep. The reason why you want to go with the strike against Marine type enemies is because, of course, the Battle Host ability, being able to reroll 1 hit roll and 1 wound roll, is more powerful when you're hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s, and also you're just popping a Marine automatically. There's no need to roll. So on average dice, you will kill 5 Space Marines very easily with the Yncarne if you are using the strike profile. As for its abilities, it halves all damage from attacks, just like the Avatar of Khaine, but here's the reason you take the Yncarne. It's because once per turn during your turn, so it can't be during the enemy's turn, you can teleport the Yncarne as close as possible to a destroyed unit, and after that, you get to activate as normal. So that means if for whatever reason your opponent actually does overwatch one of your, more cheap expendable units and kills it, then you can teleport to it, move afterward as long as the Yncarne hasn't moved yet that turn, and then, of course, shoot and follow up with a charge. This is extremely powerful, and it's one of the reasons why if somebody has a Yncarne in their army, a lot of players just aren't willing to overwatch those cheaper scoring units. However, if your opponent doesn't overwatch it, you can, of course, still destroy an enemy unit in the shooting phase, teleport to that unit, shoot as normal, and then charge afterward. So the Yncarne can be very powerful with this ability if you know how to use it correctly. As for its point cost, it is extremely expensive at 350, but it's very powerful if used well. And I think in most cases, if you use it correctly, it more than makes up for its points. As for its keywords, it does have the fly keyword, which gives it a bit more mobility. It's also a demon and a psyker though, so it will be more vulnerable against those anti-effects. It is something that, unfortunately, a lot of Eldar models don't have to worry about. Specifically that demon keyword makes it very vulnerable against anti-demon effects. Alright, so moving on to the strengths and weaknesses, its main strength is its extreme mobility. Being able to teleport across the battlefield makes it very unpredictable and makes it an absolute nightmare to deal with even after the nerfs. It does a fantastic amount of damage as well with extreme amounts of AP and pretty hard-hitting attacks. It's also very durable, not as durable as the Avatar of Cain, but still can take a punch pretty well, being able to half all damage. And of course, a 2+ armor save and a 4+ invulnerable save is a pretty tough profile. However, it does have its weaknesses. It is pretty tricky to learn how to use it properly and know when to commit it, and it also struggles against the toughest targets. The Yncarne, unfortunately, will not be able to really do a lot of damage to anything toughness 12 or above. It just doesn't have the punching power, even with the strike profile. It's going to kind of struggle against that. And especially when you're talking about the toughest targets in the game, the super heavies, the toughness 13 kind of crowd, it's just not going to be able to really hit hard against those types of enemies. As for its combos and synergies, Fortune makes it a lot more durable. And yes, I think Fortune is definitely worth it on the Yncarne, especially on a turn that it goes in. You want to make it as hard as possible for your opponent to deal with so that you basically get a free turn out of its sacrifice. The Avatar of Cain is also another synergy that a lot of people might not actually look at initially, because of course the Avatar of Cain is very expensive as well, but the combination of the Yncarne and the Avatar of Cain makes it difficult to simultaneously deal with both, and the Avatar does nicely cover the weaknesses of the Yncarne, right? The Avatar being able to take on things that are really tough, that are, toughness 13 and above, which the Yncarne will struggle with. The Avatar of Cain can also make a very good springboard for the Yncarne to jump in and go after weaker units. If you destroy a transport, for example, that the Yncarne is, unable to get to, it can then teleport to the destroyed transport and charge the unit that just disembarked. Which, of course, will now be Battle Shock and probably weakened significantly enough for the Yncarne to handle. Indirect fire or a Crimson Hunter can open up the same kinds of opportunities for the Yncarne to teleport easily to backline support units. I love using a Crimson Hunter to pop open a Basilisk, and then of course the Yncarne jumps right in and wrecks face. Or in fact, a couple of units of Dark Reapers, which can make quick work out of light infantry units in the backfield protecting objectives and so forth, which in turn can make a really easy target for the Yncarne, being able to basically clean up everything in your opponent's backfield. And I can't stress this enough, especially against Imperial Guard players, because they like to put things like mortar teams and, maybe 10-man units of infantry in the backfield to hold backfield objectives. Your Yncarne can absolutely dominate whatever's back there, whether it be Manticores, Basilisks, other support weapon teams, or what have you. And dare I say, even Lord Solar Leontis himself, if your opponent gives you that opportunity. Alright, so we've talked a little bit about how important it is to position the Yncarne, but what does it actually mean to position the Yncarne for success? Well, there's a couple of pieces of advice that I would like to give you in regards to that. So the first thing is you have to be patient with the Yncarne, right? You can't expect to get it in turn 1 and it could just, basically auto win you the game anymore. And that's because once the Yncarne is in, there is no way out. It's not like before the nerfs where you could set up something to where your opponent had to kill your unit and then your Yncarne would retreat to safety. Nowadays, if you're in and you got to live with your decisions, which kind of does make sense. Now, if you do overextend, you will lose your Yncarne, and the Yncarne is 350, so there's rarely going to be a model in the game that the Yncarne is going to be able to kill that is worth that many points in a single activation. So that is something you want to consider before throwing your Yncarne in there. Now, the other thing you want to think about is how to coordinate your attack with other threats to put your opponent in a tough position. And basically, it kind of goes something like this. So in turns where your Yncarne does in fact go in, you want to position enough units on the battlefield in various positions to where if your opponent does waste all of their attention on the Yncarne, they're going to basically lose the rest of their army. As you guys know, the Eldar army might be fragile, but the Yncarne isn't. The Yncarne, of course, being able to half all damage, having a 2+ armor save, 4+ invul, and of course probably fortune on them, means that it's most likely going to take a lot of your opponent's attention, and in fact might even prompt the use of several stratagems like tank shock and grenades. So if in fact your Yncarne is doomed, make sure you position enough Eldar units in various spots of the battlefield to make sure that your opponent will be punished for the destruction of the Yncarne. And putting your opponent in that sort of predicament during turns 2 or 3 can often lead to a pretty runaway game if your opponent mishandles it. However, there is a chance nowadays that your opponent might have a unit that can deal with the Yncarne, even in close combat, things like Orc Meganobs, for example, or some of the new things I'm seeing in the Chaos Space Marine Codex might be able to actually one-round the Yncarne pretty easily. So in those situations, you really don't want to throw your Yncarne out there just to be killed by something cheaper the next turn. Having said that, you shouldn't underestimate the Yncarne's defensive potential as well for protection of your backline, and perhaps even waiting for the state of the game to mature a little bit, to open up a little bit so that your Yncarne can go after something more vital, and maybe even play the secondary objective game. Having a big monster in your enemy deployment zone that can't be stopped for more than half of the game, turns 3, 4, and 5, just absolutely wrecking things in the backfield, can often also mean success, even if the Yncarne doesn't kill as many points as it's worth. So those are some of the things you want to keep in mind when using the Yncarne on the board. But what does this actually look like on the battlefield? Well, in the next couple of slides, I want to show you some examples of what it might look like to position your Yncarne for success in various situations. So we are going to be using terrain layout number 3 for this with diagonal deployment. Now, in this first example, we are going to be using the Yncarne defensively during turns 1 and 2. So if you're going up against a heavy assault army and you're unable to screen the full amount of models in your opponent's army, you may want to use a Yncarne as what we would call a defensive heroic intervention. So what a defensive heroic intervention basically is using a very powerful model with either strikes first or is just, very beefy, very powerful in combat to protect your backline. And in this case, we have the Yncarne waiting in the wing to use heroic intervention to ensure your opponent doesn't take your home objective. Maybe your opponent is running a bully boys list and you didn't bring enough screening to really screen out all the knobs. You're able to screen out most of them, but maybe one knob unit comes through. And despite your best efforts to shoot some of them off the board, they're very tough, especially on Waw turn. And this being the second turn that they're getting Waw, it's just a matter of time before they're able to reach your lines. However, the Yncarne is there to hopefully protect you a little bit. And in this case, when the enemy Meganob unit charges into a unit of Guardians on your objective, they would normally, of course, slaughter the Guardians and take the objective themselves, but because you have the Yncarne able to heroically intervene, you can actually kill a couple of them and basically make it so that their objective control isn't going to be enough to take that objective from you, especially with the use of lightning fast reactions. In this case, the orcs are going to have trouble killing every single Guardian in that unit and also at the same time taking on the Yncarne. They might be able to kill most of the Guardians, but probably not all of them. And then, of course, the Yncarne being able to also provide 3 OC on the objective means that most likely your opponent is just not going to be able to take it away from you. And then from here, the Orc Knob Squad can quickly be dispatched, especially if their Waw is over. Losing that 4+ invul save, losing the invul save, they're not going to be able to survive long against the Yncarne. And from there, later in the game, of course, the Yncarne can teleport to different areas of the board that it is needed based on what you can destroy. So destroy an Orc truck, jump your Yncarne there, and then wipe out the Knob unit that just disembarked from it. And remember, as they are battle shocked, your opponent is not going to be able to use any stratagems on that particular Orc squad. But even if you're not going against orcs, this strategy of keeping your Yncarne back can be very helpful against other assault armies as well. Things like World Eaters, things like Blood Angels. Of course, now we're starting to see Chaos Space Marines enter the fold. And these armies are all really fast and really deadly. And especially in regards to Chaos Space Marines, let me tell you, this is a great preventative strategy against Warp Talons. Now, if Warp Talons want to go after your Guardians on the objective, try to steal that away, maybe get a capture enemy outpost, they're really not going to be able to do it because the Yncarne can just heroically intervene, slaughter them, and then they'll have nothing to show for it. And of course, they won't be able to go back into reserve either. So your opponent will basically be wasting their unit for nothing. Same thing really with a lot of assault armies out there. Guardians, by the way, are a very squishy target to keep on a home objective. Or even if you have something like an Autarch Wayleaper on an objective, lone op just holding down the fort, it is going to be very vulnerable to heavy duty assault units. And the Yncarne does pretty well at wiping these types of units off the board. Now, the other scenario that I want to show you guys actually doesn't involve the Yncarne just absolutely wrecking your entire opponent's backline, but it involves using the Yncarne strategically to be a thorn in your opponent's side afterwards. So sometimes it may not seem worth it to destroy an enemy unit on a home objective just to move the Yncarne back behind some terrain, but in this scenario, an enemy unit is on a home objective and you destroy it and you jump the Yncarne to that unit. Now, normally you would stay on that so that you could possibly hold it. However, I would actually recommend that in some cases you use Fire and Fade to move the Yncarne back behind terrain. So after you destroy that enemy unit, you teleport the Yncarne to it, and then at the end of the shooting phase, after you shoot, you immediately Fire and Fade back. Now, you're only going to be able to Fire and Fade 10 inches, but there's usually going to be a piece of terrain that you can hide behind in your opponent's deployment zone. And this way you can successfully divert your enemy's attention. Now your opponent is going to have to either move their units off of objectives to be able to deal with the Yncarne, or they're just going to have to ignore it. If I stayed on that home objective, they would have had line of sight to the Yncarne in most cases and probably would have killed it anyway. Especially if your opponent's packing a bunch of anti-large units in the backfield, things like Gladiator Lancers, Ballistus Dreadnoughts, or perhaps even Predator Annihilators. Yes, your Yncarne might survive, but it's probably not. So in those scenarios, it's best to just take the objective away from your opponent and then move the Yncarne to safety using Fire and Fade. I've used this many times to throw off many opponents. And not only have they made themselves more vulnerable by moving their units out of terrain to try to deal with the Yncarne, but in some cases they had to completely ignore the Yncarne, and the Yncarne was able to wreck face for another turn. So don't be afraid to use Fire and Fade on the Yncarne after you teleport it in to get into a safer position. It's especially good for taking away sticky objectives, by the way, as well. A lot of people don't think about this, but if you destroy a unit on an objective, a home objective, for example, maybe a unit of Gretchen or, a unit of Space Marines after they have stickified the objective, then the sheer act of being able to move the Yncarne on that objective during the shooting phase and then Fire and Fading after still means that that objective will no longer be sticky. And this basically guarantees that your opponent is going to have to put another unit on that objective, which means another free kill for you. Especially if your Yncarne is still back there, alive and kicking. Alright, so those examples, even though they weren't the most obvious ways to use the Yncarne, are ways in which I think can really help you master the use of the Yncarne in your games. So how exactly do you use the Yncarne in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of it? Well, the Yncarne at the end of the day is a flexible tool that can be used in a variety of different situations. It's harder to use and even more difficult to master. And to master its use, one must learn to recognize when to use it defensively and when to go all in. Despite the nerfs, it remains one of the hardest units to master in the game, but the most rewarding as well. And of course, the model itself is absolutely gorgeous, and it's one of the coolest centerpiece models in the entire game. So, in conclusion, the Yncarne is an absolute monster and can be super frustrating for your opponent when used correctly, even after it's been nerfed. And It may take time to master, but it's definitely worth it, and the journey will also have the added effect of making you a better player in the process. Learning how much and when you should commit your units is a key aspect to the game in general, but it's especially important with the Eldar. And learning to use the Yncarne correctly is the absolute crucible in being able to learn these skills. And from personal experience, I can tell you guys, for those of you out there worrying if the Yncarne's still good after the nerfs, it is still awesome, even after the nerfs. You just have to think about it a little bit differently, and of course you can't be as reckless with it. But if you can do that, it's definitely going to be a model that is going to win you more games than it loses you. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video on the Yncarne. Thanks for watching. And thank you so much to all the patrons and supporters that have supported the channel over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now. You guys are really awesome. And if you do want to join the channel and help support, I have free trials on my Patreon activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which of course is made up of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategy, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or pick up some Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave those links in the description also. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.